And we're back.
Excellent. So I could probably only do like another 20 minutes, but I can throw in some links and stuff into the chat if
Go
you guys
ahead, do.
want to.
Go ahead, do it.
All right. Some of them are better than others, but these are all the names, the academic names in the movement, I guess you'd call it.
What do you mean by movement?
So there's a big in academia. There's a big world of this stuff. A lot of people, make their bones in media literacy, or they call it digital literacy. So there are conferences all over the country. The U.S. is kind of behind. Shocking, but true. Canada has a really good media literacy program. Australia does too.
Well, what do we mean by media literacy?
So
I'm going to post these in the live chat as well.
Okay, yeah. As far as like educational, it has to do with most people are consuming things in a form other than print. So like I was telling Dustin earlier, I think it should just be part of literacy. Visual literacy, digital literacy, media literacy. It's all part of reading things, because people are getting their information in all those ways. But even within the academic world, there's I put it up there twice. There's debate about the right way to do it. There's people who criticize other tribes for working with, let's say, Google or some other corporate sponsorship. So even within the realm of the people who are discussing it, there's no agreement on what it is really.
I would agree with this. In my own work, I deal a lot with trying to discern what is a credible source of information.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that is fraught with great difficulty when you're dealing with the internet landscape as to who is to be trusted and who is not to be trusted. And it kind of feels like you always have to be on your toes.
Exactly, yeah.
About who's trying to get one over on you.
Yeah.
And I would make an argument that part of modern culture as it is people are always trying to get one over on you, like even if you're doing normal economic intercourse, as it were. But with digital media, it's even more prescient because, that's the wrong word.
Prevalent.
It's prevalent, yes. It's even more prevalent because because things are hard to tell the difference between a credible source and a non-credible source. Like if I'm looking at the Daily Caller or the Daily Wire or Stormfront, even if we want to do argumentum ad Hitler, then those sites oftentimes are presented in a way that is very professional looking. And we associate professionality with veracity. And that's not always a good way to go about gathering information.
Yeah. Well, it's nothing new. It's been around forever. It's just so easy to put out there. Like I don't know if you were on.
The gatekeepers have faded away, so that's why
it's not a gatekeeper argument. It's not a gatekeeper argument.
It's an ease.
Jenkins, what were you saying?
So I kind of forget. Well, what I try to teach is how easy it is to create this stuff. Where before you used to have to, like I forget what the earliest one was. It was something in Europe in the 1600s. But to go from hamlet to hamlet would take a day. Where now in a microsecond you can spread the bad information. So it's always been there. Yellow journalism with Hearst. You give me the headlines and I'll give you the war. that's not change. It's just how easily it's disseminated now. That's the thing. And so that's what I try to address is like beyond, like, to take your phrase, be on your toes. Don't be cynical. Don't be a conspiracy nut like we were talking about Alex Jones, but do be skeptical and be critical of things. So that's what I try to stress, and that's what even among the various camps of media literacy, there is agreement on we're trying to create critical thinkers who will hopefully arrive at the right conclusion, and just try to give them the tools to do that. I think the tool to do that is learning how to produce it yourself.
I think that is a powerful tool, most certainly, because once you know how the sausage is made, then you can see good and bad sausage.
Right.
So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I just don't think it's enough.
No, it's not. It's so I had a kind of a depressing epiphany. I'm part of the computer science move. There's a move in Rhode Island's education system to finally put together computer science standards. And at this state meeting, I had to lean to the computer science teacher at the high school and ask him about how they've never had the standards before. And his answer was no, they haven't. So, computers have been around for, let's say, I mean, in the hands of students for, going on 40 years anyway. And they're just coming up with something to address that. Part of the media literacy group that I'm with has been pushing for media literacy standards. And that's when I heard about the computer science ones, that's when it just hit me. They're so far behind the 8 ball on this that I don't know if it's going to happen. If they're going to have some agreed upon set of standards and tools to use, because it's always evolving. When I was in grad school, so for library sciences, library is all about information, how it's created. And I was in with maybe 2 other people in the whole program of over 100 people who understood media as it existed then. But they were already talking about the new stuff. What I saw was a bunch of people who didn't understand the old stuff. So it's a challenge. Yeah. I wanted to see what you guys thought of this, and it's kind of agreeing with what I'm thinking of it, Isaiah. I don't know what's going to be enough.
So you're saying like our pace of technology is so quick that it's hard to really keep up with the evolution of media and computer science in a way. I know computer science is like the stuff you learn like 10 years ago, right, outside of the very basic coding, is basically obsolete.
But they're just addressing that. It's not even the rate of technology. It's people's openness to being questioning about it.
Yeah, that's what I was going. That's what I was going to go off of. Is like, it's. The way that people think that knowledge is created is very flawed, and it's not necessarily that they're applying old standards of evidence towards new media. It's more so that people aren't taught I don't even know if they aren't taught the ways to discern what is credible and what is not credible, but it's more so that people who are trying to present themselves as respectful are very good at it.
Right.
And even if it's InfoWars or something more innocuous, such as, the Wall Street Journal, you have to know what the context of the things that these people are saying in order to form an informed opinion about it. It's more so a general literacy question. As Jenkins was saying earlier, it's not explicitly and simplistically a question of the technology or the availability of the information. It's knowing how to discern what is credible and what is not.
And it's wanting to know.
And it's wanting to know.
Yeah, that's huge. The wanting to know. A lot of
I would question that notion, whether or not it's wanting to know per se, but more lean on an encouragement to know, or like a culture of what is it that I'm trying to say? Because oftentimes people don't know what they want, and it's not simply a question of saying, do people want to know this, that, or the other? It's whether or not they have the tools to pursue a line of questioning, and like epistemologically, not necessarily from a base desire to know like whether or not something violates the confirmation bias or something like that. It's like, it's a pure epistemological question. Is the information that I'm being presented actually relevant information? And how do I know that this is relevant information?
So how do you give people those epistemological tools?
Well, what I do, there's a set of so Dustin actually put it up, the access, analyze, create. But then there's a set of questions that I tell anybody I'm talking to ask, which is, okay, who's the intended audience for this? Who's creating this, and what purpose? And then I'll go through, the various purposes, which can be any combination or just singular of educating or entertaining or persuading, or a lot of the time misleading. And so to go with your skepticism of it, Isaiah, I have a lot of people tell me like, oh, you know what? You've ruined movies for me by explaining that certain cuts are done a certain way to communicate something, because now I can't watch the movie and just enjoy the flight of fantasy of it. But then I've also had other people come and say that they find it much more interesting to do that way. But even within the world of media literacy, you go to conferences, and it's something that's been talked about MMA all the time, where it's just preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
And there's not, I was able to bring a bunch of students to, there was a Northeast Media Literacy Conference, and they asked me to bring some students who had been really good at this stuff. And my wife came along because we had to have 2 cars. And she just marveled at the educated stupidity of the people going around. So these people purport to understand media, are putting them out themselves out there to educate people about media, and they're unaware of how they're presenting their own media, or to just continue with the use of the word media. But they're if you look at one of these Media Education Lab, it's not a very impressive website. And the way I first linked in with these the academic world of it was, I was at a conference where they had one microphone wired and were passing it around an auditorium. So I approached them during the break, gave them kind of like we did with the equipment list. Like, hey, I noticed you had some trouble with this. Here's $1,500 worth of equipment that'll make it really slick. So it's kind of like, heal thyself. So even the people who are the experts in it, because for the most part, they've been working in the ivory tower, they've never produced it. They don't understand what goes into producing it either. You, Isaiah, and you, Dustin, and I don't really know your experience, other guy whose name I forgot. Sorry, Mindgasm guy. But you guys know more about it, about the production of it, and about the power of how to manipulate it than a lot of these people do. Their knowledge is strictly academic. It's a little disheartening.
But it's also a testament to how knowledge is created nowadays. And once the tools to create media have been democratized, anybody can do it.
Right.
And the importance of institutions in creating media has been diminished therein. Now, alongside that, like a lot of the media that I consume is either primary media, i.e., people who are taking, cameras and going into a place and doing something,
Right.
And then they're presenting that media, right? So that's what I would call primary media. Secondary media is somebody who is reporting on something else. So it's like current event stuff, like the Michael Brooks show. The Michael Brooks show is a secondary media show because they're creating analysis off of current events, essentially people who are creating primary media, i.e., the AP Newswire or Now This News or whatever, whatever journalists or whomever is going out into the field and collecting that media. That's secondary media if you're reporting on somebody else's reporting, right? And then there's tertiary media, which is more along the lines of editorial media, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that looks at all these things in concert and then presents an analysis and an opinion based on all these other things. And oftentimes people can't tell the difference between tertiary media and primary media.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like if you're making media, then you know the difference.
Yeah.
So that's where I see the strength in your approach to teaching media literacy. Within that, however, like there's a difficulty of producing media. Not everybody's going to think that they have the ability, skill, gumption, whatever, to make YouTube videos. Even if people make Snapchat videos, which is an even lower bar of entry than YouTube videos. Then, like, it's hard for them to put Snapchat in the context of a broader media landscape because I don't think of it that way.
No,
I don't think of it that way.
They totally don't. And that's part of what I try to, so I started teaching before all this social media existed. So publishing, in my descriptions of it was, you have a printing press, you have a book, it's a big process to publish. So now what I'm teaching is it's a process of pushing a button to publish. And also trying to get them to understand that ease is awesome. And I'll phrase it this way, like it's super easy and that's awesome. It's super easy and that's scary too, to try to create at least, see, I'm in a small town, so it's kind of another frustration, but at least create, 80 kids a year who do understand what you just described, who do have that knowledge and, pie in the sky kind of act like the pillow full of feathers on the mountaintop and spread it that way. I don't have, I never had an illusion of saving the world, but it does become a little daunting when you think of what you just described.
Yeah. I mean, it's always daunting this way that things are set up because the world is too big for the human mind to comprehend. It really is. And like I could point to all these facts and figures to support that, but like to get into media literacy again, like how do I know that Robin Dunbar did rigorous anthropological work, Right. And I think that Robin Dunbar's work is some of the most credible anthropological work that you can look at because it is a multivariate analysis of human behavior that uses statistics and qualitative information to come at a conclusion. So because within that statement, I'm saying all these things that qualify this form of media, that allows me to judge the veracity of it, right?
Right.
People do not do that spontaneously. It doesn't feel like often. Or conversely, The majority of people do that, but there is just so much information that is difficult to know which sources are verifiable and reputable sources, and not even necessarily reputable in that respect either, because .gov sources are not necessarily reputable to somebody who doesn't believe what the government is telling them.
Right.
Get back to the conspiracy angle.
I think that's related to what we were talking about earlier, in terms of that there's so much information that people just get drawn into the confirmation bias of like what we seek to believe anyway, like what we want to believe, because there are so many sources available to confirm our biases.
And it gets exhausting for people.
Yeah.
Just anecdotally, I've talked to people who just will say in an exasperated tone, "Oh, I don't have the energy for it. I don't."
Yeah.
And as someone who's worked in news too, a lot of discussion at a lot of these conferences now revolves around fake news, and it's hard to because I'm surrounded by them. It's hard to not point out, okay, it's not necessarily fake news that you should be worried about. It's the manipulation of news, because it's all a version of what's going on. There is no, there's no such thing as a straight documentary of anything. There's no such thing as just completely accurately covering a story. Like I covered one police brutality story, and these cops were just blatant. It was obvious that they had broken the law and beat up these two Hispanic guys. And I covered it right through the court case. And, every shot I would use of them, they'd be up on the witness stand and their fist would be hitting their hand. The context of it didn't matter, because I had a minute and a half to visually tell the story. But every time I would show these cops, who I made the decision were the bad guys in this story, I showed them in a way that, subliminally at least,
made them the bad guys.
Made them the bad guy. And every time you saw these two other guys, they looked, they had doe eyes and they looked sad. Now, the story was true, but it was also not true. So that's the real struggle for teaching it. Is like especially because I'm dealing with an age group where you can't really get into nuance as much as I would like.
I don't know if I would agree with that statement, because I think that young people are very good at nuance. I really do.
Yeah.
I think that more often than not, compared to older people that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, younger people are more open to the fact that they don't know everything. Whereas older people,
I agree with you on that. Yeah. Yeah.
Think that they know everything.
Yeah.
And
I have a question about that. Do you think that's a result of young people think that because they're inundated with all this information and they can't make who's or ands of what's going on, and older people had a very slim gateway of information that they were easily able to digest?
I think it's a question of enculturation. And I think that historically in the United States, with a stratified information stream of major news networks presenting one image of America every night, the ability to question what is reality slips away if the reality is presented the same every night.
Right. Yeah, well, that's another.
And people didn't used to travel or talk to as many people around the world as they do nowadays. It's not necessarily an information overload. It's just an information diversification.
Yeah, and that's, as part of that, another big question I always have them ask is what was left out. And I guess that's more of the challenge with the younger kids, is their experience isn't as wide. To think of it in those terms. I agree about the nuance. but because their experience isn't as wide, maybe they're not capable of thinking of all the stuff that's possibly left out, which is why I love having them produce their own stuff, because then they have to decide, okay, I'm not going to use this part, and they have to think about why they're not using that part. And ideally what they do is once they have their piece, they get together as a class and they analyze it, and that way you've got the producers giving you a behind the scenes look. And that, I don't have any illusions that, oh, these kids are going to go out and become media professionals or anything, but at the very least they'll dipped their toe in the water of skeptical use.
100%.
But
The good thing. The good
another
thing you're doing
hesitation I would
there.
have though is like, all right, I could be creating the next great manipulator of, one kid's like, oh, wait a minute, I could do this. Or I could be creating the next person who starts the next Hollow Earth movement or something like that. So I would have to kind of guard how I present it.
I think what's more important is that more people know how to make good media.
Yeah.
And by good, I don't mean verifiable or whatever. I mean like compelling and artistic, because I think that there are, generally speaking, more people who have traits that are not exploitative and don't want to be. I don't think that the amount of bad actors that exists are as great as is perceived on the internet.
No, it's
yeah,
it's definitely. I think when you can reach them and show them that it's not all that hard, especially with the technology. When I was starting, it was all linear analog stuff, and now there's free, professional production level editing software and everything. Once you can show them that, I think they embrace the magic of it, and I think for the most part they do it out of a love and a sense of fun and adventure. I don't think everybody out there is thinking like, how can I? maybe I'm projecting my own inner thoughts onto thinking of people who can manipulate and take power.
So it's like you're giving them the keys to the nuclear bomb.
Well, that's a negativity bias statement, though.
Right.
No, I'm not like saying that is the case at all.
I stress power. Like I actually had to get. This was one of my happiest moments. Towards the end of the year, we do like a recap, and this kid asked, "Why are you giving us all so much power?" I was like, "That's my job. That's how I do it." Like I was like, "All right, cool. This one kid at least gets it." And I go by the one, and there's probably 10 others that did get it too. But yeah, I love that.
Well, to make an analogy with that, like I studied chemistry before I changed my life completely. I was a chemical engineering major, right? So the entire thing about that is that they literally teach you how to make bombs.
Right.
That's part of how you learn about chemistry. Like, you can't stop people from making bombs.
Right.
But
analogy.
Most people don't make bombs.
Yeah. That's a very good analogy.
Yeah, it's because when I hear Brian speak, it almost reminds me of like The Last Jedi, where you have Luke Skywalker trying to teach like the next generation of Jedi, and then one of them becomes like an errant figure who becomes evil.
Right.
So that's what I'm seeing, like his concern. That's like how I'm framing it. I'm not saying that that's definitely the case that's happening. I'm just saying that's kind of an analogy there.
Yeah, no, it's not really. It's not like in the forefront of my brain, but it's just that little. Okay, I'm looking at this from all angles. It's possible that there's one kid in here that's going to do that. For the most part.
To your Star Wars, Dusty, to your Star Wars, I'm going to raise Spider-Man and say, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, just don't. If that does occur, you don't have to do the whole Luke Skywalker thing where you sacrifice your life to stop that individual. Like,
spoiler alert.
Dude, the movie came out a couple of years ago. Come on.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Sorry, people.
I think it came out last year.
Well, did it? It was on Netflix last year.
Wasn't it like 2017, maybe? I don't know.
December 15th, 2017. So
Okay.
it was like
it's a year old.
So like
It's
a year
old.
We'll give it a year.
yeah.
Hey, it was on Netflix. If you hadn't seen it while it was on Netflix, that's not my fault.
I give a 5-year period. That's the only reasonable thing for me.
All
But the point
I'll
is,
try to stick to that standard.
Yeah, listen to what I say, Dustin. So where do we go from here? Like, because there are things that are reported on, and there are things that at all levels of media, from the most, basic children's books to academic papers and academic books to government documents that are like, how do you know what is being said is verifiable and actionable? Because oftentimes the way that things are presented, it's a call to action,
Yeah.
Right.
I try not to do that just because, like, in my own ethical schema, I don't think that I have the authority to influence, not necessarily influence. I don't have the authority to compel other people's behavior. But oftentimes what people are doing when they're writing something is that they're trying to compel an entity or a group or a society to behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
How do we discern, like, how do we figure out what we're trying to be convinced of? How do we figure out if the evidence that they're using in their argument is true or, like, relevant to the argument that they're presenting, rather? How do we figure out that shit? Because it's hard.
Good question.
Yeah, well, that's why I always throw it back. Everything can be answered with it depends. What we talk about authority, who's putting the information out there. If you can't figure out who's putting the information out there, that's a giveaway right off the bat. But then a lot of the time, even when you can figure it out, you have to dig deeper, and you have to decide when it's important to you or not. Like, if it's, so we talk about Wikipedia, and Wikipedia gets slammed all the time in education, but I use it all the time. And so I try to educate them about it, and no one's going to allow you to use any kind of encyclopedia as a first source or as a main source or anything other than a start. So, and the influence and the authority stuff, I try to make it really clear, like, think for yourselves. At some point you have to take that leap of just, okay, I've done my due diligence. Maybe I'm being fooled. I've seen it. I was sharing something with somebody about somebody at the University of Singapore has created I don't know if a program is the right word, but a technology that can send taste information over the internet. So you have an electrical sensor you put on your tongue, or you put on the rim of a glass. Somebody somewhere else can send you that information, the heat and the pH of it, and the electricity will trigger your tasting it, lemonade. That on the face of it just seems fake. And after I shared it, I thought, oh man, I think I did my research, but University of Singapore, okay, I'll have to admit to a little bit of like, what is the University of Singapore? So I further researched it, and okay, the guy now works at the University of Maine, but on his website he had a misspelling, and so I went to the University of Maine's website, and he's definitely on the faculty, so this stuff does exist. But I was motivated to dig deeper into that. At any point halfway through, I may have just decided to stop. It was purely ego because I didn't want to be wrong. You know, at some point, the personal responsibility kicks in, and you have to take that risk, I guess. I don't know if there's any way to really foolproof it.
Well, and like we were talking about earlier too, there's just so much information. Like I was telling you earlier about someone I know who he believes like some Alex Jones type stuff, and he denies climate change too. And he, like, depending on the person, like this person I know, for example, he says so much that, like, looking up and debunking every single one of his claims literally took me hours and hours to do.
Well, that's a rhetorical internet technique called Jack.
Yeah.
Right.
What?
Like that's a technique that people use on the internet or in real life to present as much information as possible that has to be verified to argue against it.
Right.
And like you have to be able to spot when people are fucking with you.
Like,
yeah, he's not fucking with me.
One thing I will say too is that
but he's also fucking with you.
Yeah.
No, he's just really, really sure of himself.
And he's fucking with you.
He's not. If you knew the guy, you like I guess the way you could put it would be like 99% of what he says is fucking with you in that case.
Yeah. That's what a lot of people do. Like the people who spout these conspiracy theories, their goal oftentimes seems to be to annoy people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I looked like Andrew was going psychedelic there for a couple seconds.
Oh, did
He's
it?
always psychedelic.
Yep.
Well, your screen was flashing pink. I don't know if anybody could see that. Yeah. I think one of the things too that this kind of stems in, if you want to use Facebook MMA posts like comparison, which I often do. There are certain things that are kind of easy to explain, very simple. If it takes a 2-hour video to explain something, and then the person that watched that video still can't tell you what it's about.
Yeah.
But there's some type of damning information about a specific person, and that's kind of, to me, a red flag of that employ of providing so much information it becomes hard to debunk because it's so much. I think that's like a big red flag for me, where they just keep coming up with these dubious connections that will take a while to figure that they do not pan out.
Yeah.
And another example, if any of you listen to the latest Alex Jones show on Rogan, he goes off for like 30 fucking minutes about random bullshit that each claim, it's just a claim after a claim after a claim after a claim.
Yeah.
And it would take so long just to dissect everything that he says and to debunk it that it's because he has so much confidence in what he's saying as the truth. It just, I don't know how he convinces people. It's weird.
Well, you just said it. He does it with confidence. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what it takes a lot of the time, is just
that's what a con man is, right?
Well, yeah. a lot of the people in that academic world that I was talking about, they are experts because they put themselves out there as experts. You know, they've published papers that, Hunter's talked about that whole world. It's kind of like the art world around in Rhode Island anyway is based on perpetuating itself as the art world. So everybody builds each other up. No one ever points out when art's bad. It just becomes an illusion. And it's kind of the same. I was shocked because I always thought I wanted to work in college. And it's just as much as of a confidence game as anything else. You put yourself out there, you publish your stuff in the journals that you're part of the board of, and now you're an expert on it. And now people will believe you because you've published, you know? So where I sit in my library, behind me, what I have is a bunch of press clippings of me. And that's by design. So you're looking at me and what you're seeing is like, oh, all these accomplishments. So I don't want to question what he says. And I think that's how Alex Jones puts it across. So people who are going to be credulous of it are going to believe it because he says it with so much confidence. It's like a master class in how to do it. I mean, he goes, I find him a little silly, but
it's also it's the same. It's the same whenever you hear just people debate too.
Or Rush Limbaugh is the same thing, and he's made millions and millions for decades.
Well, all you have to do is be somebody of prominence and say that what you're saying is undeniable, and people will believe you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong, but like there's a certain modicum of ideological and financial backing that supplies actors like this, because like if you listen to the recent Jon Ronson, that This American Life, or Jon Ronson on Russell Brand talking about Alex Jones, what Jon Ronson says about Alex Jones is that he wasn't always like this, but he always had these fucking crazy ass tendencies, right? Like,
yeah,
Alex Jones is not a serious person. Alex Jones is not a serious person. He may believe what he says, but he's not a serious person.
Yeah.
So, like, you can assess the credibility of an individual based on the veracity of what they've been saying and whether or not what they have said can be falsified. Like, I don't care about Alex Jones. What I care about is that Alex Jones keeps popping up everywhere I look. Like, Alex Jones is not a serious person. Why do I have to talk about Alex Jones as if he were? That's what bothers me with this whole modern media landscape, more so than the questioning of the information. It's very clear what people want you to believe based on what they're saying. And it's very clear the ideology that they're upholding if you know what to look for.
Yeah.
And part of it may be that people don't know what to look for, but part of it is also that I think that a lot of people share the ideologies that are presented by these different people.
Well, and it's easy to take Alex Jones seriously so that you can get outraged about him, and then you can spread news about how outrageous he is.
I don't know if I agree with that either, because if you share values with Alex Jones, then you're going to believe what Alex Jones says.
I'm talking about people who are like really angry about what he says and all that.
Well, you're flipping it on its head, but like if nobody believes what Alex Jones says, then he's just a crackpot on the street.
But lots of people do.
That's what I'm saying. Like, people who point out how stupid Alex Jones is don't have any bearing on Alex Jones's success.
No.
Like, that's absurd to me to even think of it that way. Like, the people who give Alex Jones power are the people who share his ideology and beliefs. They're the ones who are responsible for the prominence of Alex Jones.
Yeah.
So if you think that what Alex Jones says is not credible, then you have to understand that it's a whole cohort of people who support him, who support a demonstrable liar and charlatan. And how you have to make decisions within yourself about whether or not you want to support that kind of discourse, because it's insanity masquerading as serious analysis.
Well, how do you stop people from purchasing his tactical taint wipes?
You don't. I don't really care. I just don't want to associate with those people.
Okay. So what if I, as a gag, purchase some Alex Jones tactical taint wipes?
Well, you had to frame it as a gag. Like, I'll pull my ass out on the highway and put it on somebody's car window and moon a thing of nuns going by as a gag. But that doesn't reflect on whether or not I can read Slaughterhouse-Five and recount the story accurately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Alex Jones phenomenon is definitely strange. And it's kind of odd.
Well, it's no different it's no different than Joseph McCarthy. It's really not.
Yeah, you just trade out communists for globalists, and you've got a kind of McCarthy version there.
I think tackling the Alex Jones issue is a good topic for a future episode. Honestly, because Alex Jones and the whole rise of polarization as such is a more complex issue than just discerning what is accurate information, what is not accurate information.
Well, in that case as well, do you think his appearance on Rogan was a good thing or a bad thing?
You should know me well enough by now that I don't believe in good or bad.
Net positive or net negative?
I don't watch Rogan anymore because he does shit like that.
So a net negative.
For me, like I don't care about what anybody else does. I really don't. Like if people want to sit and watch Rogan and believe what Alex Jones says, then fucking I don't care. Like some people like watching baseball. I don't.
Yeah. I understand that.
It's that simple for me. Like if Rogan were to reprise the quality of shows that he had in 2015, then I'd probably watch Rogan again. But like that's not the quality of shows that he started having in 2016 that continued into 2017, and I haven't watched Rogan since 2017.
Okay.
What do you mean exactly by that? Like in terms of you mean in terms of the guests?
Part of it is the guests. Part of it is the way that he interacted with the guests. Because like there are things that I would most certainly disagree with Rogan on, and there's things that I disagree with Hunter on, and there's things that I disagree with you guys on. But if we can present our disagreements, make them clear, and make why we disagree with each other on this specific topic clear, then we can have a productive, fun conversation between all parties involved. I don't think that the conversations that Rogan has had with like Ana Kasparian, even if we want to go a left winger, or has had with Jordan Peterson or Steven Crowder, ironically, one of the best Rogan moments with the right winger that I ever saw was when he was talking with Steven Crowder about weed.
About weed, yeah.
Because that's holding somebody accountable for what they believe in. And
well, also Rogan versus Candace Owens on climate change.
Yeah. Like,
and then
I still don't understand how Candace Owens got traction, but like,
yeah,
that's like part of it. Like, you can show how insane the ideas that are being presented are. You don't have to let just people talk, which is what Rubin does. Like Rubin was interesting to watch until he had his ass handed to him by Larry Elder about Dave Rubin's ignorance of 1960s social programs. Like, he doesn't even know the black conservative fucking talking points that Larry Elder is famous for and that every other black conservative is famous for when they talk about the destruction of the black family due to the Great Society program. Like, every black conservative touts that. And if you're just going to let them say that and you don't know a refutation to it, how can you have a productive conversation with that person? You're arguing from a place of ignorance.
He at least admitted to that, though.
Yeah, but why am I going to watch somebody who purports to be a journalist or an expert or somebody who has an intellectual capacity to make these arguments just sit there and constantly present himself as the most ignorant man in the room? He's not stupid. Dave Rubin is not stupid.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that he does research enough to know the environment around him when he talks to a lot of the people that he talks to.
So you're saying like that he doesn't meet the caliber of his guests and basically knowing what they're going to talk about?
In part, yes. In part, yes. But I think that his interview structure is not conducive towards holding somebody accountable for their beliefs. Whereas, like, I enjoy listening to Mehdi Hasan, who
I think I know too.
Do you know who Mehdi Hasan is?
I don't know Mehdi Hasan, but I also think possibly, I don't know, because this might sound like a conspiracy theory, but maybe some of those guests he doesn't really care to talk to. They're just kind of, hey, we've had this guy on. Like, it seems like Rogan at least wants to talk to the people he has on.
Yeah.
Like, he's interested in them, but sometimes, like in the case of the Larry Elder one, he didn't know shit about him, about his positions. So it's almost like I wouldn't say he's desperate for guests, but I would say that maybe the guests that he has on aren't because he truly wants them to be on, or that's who he truly wants to speak with.
I don't purport to know anything about.
I don't know either. It's
about
just a theory.
Dave Rubin's brain, and I don't really care because I don't consume his media anymore. Like, when I was watching what he was doing, I found it interesting for about the first 3 months, and like Larry Elder was a tipping point for me. It was like, this guy is not a serious person. Dave Rubin is not a serious person. He wants to present himself as a serious person, but he doesn't want to do the work. And like, in order to have good discourse, you have to know who you're talking to, and you have to know enough about the arguments that they're making in order to present it in a way that somebody can look at it and know what the fuck is going on. Because when Larry Elder went off on that tangent about, you know, the destruction of the black family due to the Great Society programs, it's like he's completely ignoring the context of desegregation, completely ignoring the context of the voting rights and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65. It's completely ignoring the context of the Vietnam War and the literal riots that occurred due to the fact that black people specifically were getting drafted at a higher rate than white people who had more money. Or like the FHA structure that was presented by by both the Roosevelt and the Truman and the Eisenhower administrations following before and after World War II. Like, if I was a black veteran in 1955, I could not buy the house that I live in right now because simply I would be black. And it's crazy to not talk about that and then point to like something completely social, like a downstream external effect of the Great Society program breaking up Black families when Black families could not. One, we're not nuclear families at the rate that white families were prior to the war, and two, could not have the material benefits that a booming economy had granted the rest of the country. So, like, it's a multivariate situation that had been needled down into this one thing that even a rudimentary knowledge of history could have presented a very strong refutation of. And like, that's the thing that annoys me with the way that a lot of people present these things, is that they're so ignorant that they take the argument that is being thrown at them for granted. Like, I don't think that Larry Elder is a bad person or is a bad actor. And I think that a lot of the things that he says have some veracity in their sources. But I think his conclusions are completely wrong. And I think that the way that he presents them are not necessarily reflective of the reality that most people live in. And I don't even purport to know the reality that most people live in, but I know that, like, the history shows that Larry Elder is incorrect in a lot of his analysis. And you can argue on that basis. And like I mentioned Mehdi Hasan before, Mehdi Hasan actually does that. Like, I disagree with Mehdi Hasan on almost everything, but at least he knows the history, and at least he knows the ideological backing and the epistemology of the people that he's talking to, so that he can refute the arguments that are being made. Like the interview that he had with Eric Prince, the Blackwater chief, a few weeks ago, a key example of that.
Why would you interview that guy?
Because he's Eric Prince.
Yeah, that's an interesting interview.
He's the brother of the Secretary of Education, who has contracts with the U.S. government to do defense contracting and intelligence contracting overseas, and with foreign governments.
Wasn't he trying to get contracts with the Chinese?
Yeah, that's what happens when you're a mercenary. You go to who has money. Like, Boeing sells plane parts to the Chinese military. The Chinese military flies Sikorsky helicopters. That's what a public-private partnership does. A private company is going to go to who has money.
Yeah, but isn't it particularly insidious when they're basically selling themselves as a private military force to a foreign government?
Yeah. They're mercenaries. That's what mercenaries do.
Okay, who interviewed him? Because I want to check this out later.
Mehdi Hasan. It's on Al Jazeera.
All right, I'll have to check that out. I do listen to a bit skewed history podcasts. One of them being The Dollop, which is super lefty.
The Dollop isn't super lefty.
Well, it's definitely lefty.
It's liberal.
Yeah.
It's left liberal.
Yeah, it's left liberal, but
so we can
there's a very interesting dollop about that guy.
About Eric Prince?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a fucking mercenary.
Yeah, so I'll have to check that out.
The problem I have with Eric Prince is that he's a mercenary who doesn't want to say that he's a mercenary.
Are you being disingenuous about what he does?
I think most people in the public eye are disingenuous about what they are. That's literally the only reason why I don't hate Bernie Sanders, is because he's a socialist and he doesn't pretend not to be.
Yeah, I don't hate Bernie. I like him for the most part. I like his honesty, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And his I don't know, he just seems inherently anti-corrupt.
Yeah.
That's just a big plus for me.
Well, and like when we talk about corruption, that also plays a part in media literacy, because I was thinking about this today because I was listening to a car podcast talking about the changing in automotive media over the past 40 years, and where stuff like Peterson Publishing, which publishes Motor Trend, Hot Rod Magazine, etc., how they went from serving their customer, who are the people who bought the magazines, to serving advertisers, who are the people who bought ad space. So ostensibly, the customer for them changed from the readers of the magazine to the advertisers.
Dude, I can totally relate when it comes to games media. It's same way.
I think that's generally speaking the way that media has been going. And with the advent of ad block software and like more democratized media, that advertisement based form is the purchasing power of advertisers has been diminished, I feel, just by my own usage. Like, because I actively block advertisers on Twitter. I actively block advertisers on Instagram and Facebook because like Facebook is selling my time and my attention to this person. And Facebook doesn't own my time. So what gives them the right to sell me to them? You know, that's part of the dichotomy of social media, is that like in social media, the users are the product and the advertisers are the customers.
Yep.
That's why Facebook doesn't give a fuck about you. Twitter doesn't give a fuck about you. Google doesn't give a fuck about you.
Yeah,
you're the product.
That's certainly the case. Like I remember, and it's been recent, where Facebook was intentionally circulating George Soros conspiracies.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they don't give a shit, man.
Well, they just want money. That's like all they're there for, is they want money.
It's a business, yeah.
And you know, that's just how capitalism, corporate capitalism or financial capitalism, however you want to phrase it, that's how that economic system works. The goal is to make money, and people will do what they can to make money.
Yeah, I get that, but we also have to be aware that just because somebody in some weird tangential way receives some type of money from certain organizations, that also doesn't mean that they are basically that organization's puppet.
Well, I wouldn't say that they are their puppet either. But then again, we could look at everything that Lawrence Lessig has presented in Republic Lost. Like,
well, that's
not
different.
Saying, how is it different? How is it different?
Because we're talking about politicians, right?
What's the difference between a politician and anybody else?
That's a good question. Well, I guess it's like, you mean, okay, so their customer becomes the biggest donor, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the difference. When I'm talking about a tangential way that somebody receives funding from an organization, it's like, okay, they receive funding, but how much?
Oh,
like if we're thinking about, like, just name any random person who has Patreon and maybe they get some money from a nonprofit in some other way.
Yeah.
What if they receive the bulk of their money from Patreon donors? Are we going to suspect just because they might receive a smaller amount from a big donor that they're going to change their tune?
And this is why it's important. Well, that's why it's important to know where people get their money from. And there's more transparency with government than there is with private parties. Like, who knows where the fuck Dave Rubin gets his money? Who knows where the fuck Mehdi Hasan gets his money? It's more clear with Mehdi Hasan because he's a staff writer at The Intercept. But like,
well, it used to be a little bit clearer until Ruben left Patreon and stopped disclosing like his monthly donations.
well, even then, you don't know the entirety or totality of somebody's income.
Yeah,
like,
not unless
and
they
you can't
publish their
know
taxes online.
unless they publish their taxes. So like, that's information that you can't know. So like, that's a confounding factor when you're trying to discern how all these things work. It's infuriating sometimes because like the Wall Street Journal is funded by Rupert Murdoch, who funds Fox News and owns like half the media in Britain. So
well, I
like,
could just say with politicians, yeah, it's a little more transparent about how much money they're receiving. It's just harder for when they're private and we can't see where they're receiving their funding specifically.
yeah.
So at least we could be more certain about politicians.
Yeah.
Well,
their whole job is to convince people that they're credible, whether or not they are. So like, the Wall Street Journal doesn't have to convince you that they're a credible newspaper because they have a reputation of the Wall Street Journal, regardless of what they're publishing.
Mm.
And like, oftentimes the stuff that is published in the journal editorial section is stuff that seems like it could be coming from Breitbart.
And Wall Street Journal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I usually judge the audience of these particular things by browsing their comment section.
Yeah.
Like, go to a Breitbart comment section.
That's a
like,
good
Jesus
tactic.
Fucking Christ.
That's a good tactic.
Like, if you cannot deny that that Breitbart is a favorite of white supremacists, just go to the damn comment section. It's fucking clear. It's like, read their comment section for any massacre involving like some crazy white dude or anything that has to do with Muslims. It's just, there's like blatant white supremacy in the comment section.
Well, and Tucker Carlson actively pushes a white genocide myth. And then like,
yeah, I don't even know much about his rhetoric at all.
See, you know what's funny is that like, I never really construed myself as a centrist, but like, I often found more common ground with people who sat as centrists because they were like generally people who would listen to arguments that I make. But nowadays it feels like that's not even the case because there's like so much exploitative information on the internet that like, I feel like the both sides narrative of arguments is like nonsensical anymore because you have one side actively saying, oh, that the Mexicans are going to replace us, and you have the other side who are saying simply, you're fucking crazy, that's racist, or whatever left liberals want to argue about that. And it's like both sides are not equal because one is saying all Mexicans are evil, even the ones who live here and are citizens. And you have the other side who is saying, hey, stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides aren't equal.
Well, I don't even try to make equivalency arguments anymore. I just focus on I don't do tribe comparisons anymore. I just focus on the actual deed. I don't say, oh, these guys do it better. This tribe is morally superior here, blah, 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 blah. I just don't deal with that bullshit anymore.
Yeah.
Which is what you mean by the both sides argument. Like, it's like, fuck that shit. It's like, let's take a look at this specific thing. Let's not make it about a tribe comparison. Is this shit wrong in some way? Yeah. It's like, everybody's going to have a problem, but it doesn't we don't have to keep making comparisons between these opposite tribes. It's just look at what's going on and focus on trying to solve a problem rather than to prove one tribe right or wrong.
I find myself more often than not looking at stuff and saying I don't agree with either side, but these people are less ghoulish. Like I hate the Democrats, but I'm not going to vote for a Republican probably for the rest of my life if they say the way that they are.
Mm.
So
what would have been a Democrat that you, or I'm sorry, a Republican that you would have voted for in the past? That
I voted for John McCain in 2008. Well, no, I voted for Bob Barr in 2008. I was going to vote for McCain, but then he got fucking Grandma Alaska on his ticket, and I was
Grandma
like,
Alaska. Well, she was a Tea Partier, right?
no, she was a fucking kook. This is pre Tea Party.
Wasn't she
it's pre Tea Party? It's pre Tea Party.
She became one though, right?
She became one, but she was a fucking insane, ignorant person in 2007 and 2008.
Hmm.
Like she was not a serious person. Like like she was everything that was bad about HW on steroids. Like at least John McCain had a understandable fucking way to present himself, even if I disagree with a lot of the shit that he said. But then again, in 2008, I joined the Air Force 2 years later, so maybe we didn't disagree all that much afterwards. So like nowadays, it seems like the way that the Republican Party presents themselves is as a very specific thing, in the same way that Dixiecrats presented themselves in 1954.
And so they're just reacting. It's just
they're reactionaries. They're reactionaries. And I don't vote for reactionaries.
Hmm. Yeah, that seems to be the case. Like, I don't follow, like, Republican rhetoric or Democratic rhetoric for that much. Like, I don't know. Some of them are reactionaries, but I'm sure there's some that aren't.
I'm sure there's some that aren't. And, like, as long as, since the 1980s, more often and more often, Republicans have taken a reactionary line on things like free speech, free expression, and a whole load of things. And that, since the presidency of Clinton, has become part of the Democratic Party platform. And, you know, a lot of it is like, I prefer state and local governments to have more power than a federal government in most issues. Mm. And in the past, the Republican Party would have supported that, but nowadays, not so much. And like, if I could, like, that's part of the reasons why I used to like the Republican Party, is because they would say, I don't really care what you think. I just don't want the federal government to do this, that, or the other. Like, I lived in California. There was no way that gun laws were ever going to change in California.
Nope.
So why do I care about gun control in California? I don't. Why do I care about abortion rights in California? That's never going to change in California. I don't. I don't want the government to be able to institute other laws that negatively affect my home of California. And a lot of times things are presented in that way when the Democratic Party wants to pass a law, is like the ACA is less comprehensive than Medi-Cal. And like, it negatively affects low-income people in California. Like the way
ACA
that
fucks up Medi-Cal recipients.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's no good.
Well,
Medi-Cal was awesome. I was raised on
yeah.
Medi-Cal as a low-income kid back in the day.
Medi-Cal was a pretty decent program. Now there are some holes in that program, but it was a pretty decent program.
Yeah,
And
I had
like
health care till I was 18, so it
there
helped me
are
out.
some aspects of the Medicare or the Medicaid expansion that California did incorporate, but it made like the private insurance stuff more difficult. Like I don't think that the federal government has the right to force people to participate in a market.
Hmm.
So like, but you know, to this extent, I would say that I would rather have a Medicare for all than the ACA. I think the ACA sucks, but Medicare for all is better.
Hmm.
So like it's a matter of what works better for me.
So one thing, because I'm not super well versed on Medicare, because I know just regular prices are astronomical when you're dealing with special emergency care and things like that. How much negotiating does the government do when it comes to prices when we're talking about Medicare?
You know what the irony of that is that basically it used to be that the government had one price and that's all that they would pay, and that the they were still the biggest customer, and companies could make a profit from the government buying their drugs because they bought so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the profit margins on individual units was lower, but because the government was the largest customer of drugs, they
Bulk.
they got a lot more. Medicare Part B took away all that. That was a George Bush
Oh,
policy.
okay.
So that's when we start seeing astronomical hikes in
That's when the
pharmaceuticals.
price of all drugs started skyrocketing.
Damn you, George Bush.
Plus, add that add that
The
with
hedge
the
funding of pharmaceutical hedge
part of
funding.
part of that. Add that with the extension. I think in verify this because this might be complete bullshit. But I think in the 1990s there was a rollback of trademark and copyright law on patent law. There was a rollback of patent law in the 1990s regarding pharmaceuticals, in which they extended the time period and the degree of difference between two drugs. They made it more lenient for drug companies to do minor modifications to drugs and
And call them
give them less
unique.
incentives to make generics. Like,
Oh,
for example, oxycodone. Oxycodone is the way that Purdue Pharmaceuticals sold it was cut with an NSAID in it, usually acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. And
yeah. So
because it was
Percocet.
yes, because it was so significantly different than a generic version
It's
of
not.
codeine.
It's just. All it is OxyContin with a little bit of Tylenol in it.
Well,
So,
not only that
well, it's a
is
time release thing too.
time release. Like,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work any different than fucking codeine. Like, and codeine used to be in Robitussin. So, like, that's part of how things get changed and fixed. And a lot of that is what you're seeing with the rollout of opioid laws now. Some of it is like trying to ameliorate the way that people get drugs from prescriptions, but a lot of it is dealing with like the way that people consume drugs and trying to control that. And I think that's a fucking bad way to approach it. And like having the FDA if you were to have the FDA come out and say this is how things should be, or even if you were to have a private organization like the American Medical Association come out and say this is how we're going to do things because this is the way that we say that they are. Meanwhile, somebody has to go back to the doctor once a week if they have cancer to get their Percocets or get their oxys or get their Vicodin, whatever. I think that is a negative downstream effect of of reactionary politics regarding a whole lot of things. And I think that's pervasive in overcorrection at the federal level. And I don't think that's the right way to do things for most people most of the time. But like, there are better ways to do things, generally speaking, if we're going to talk about policy. I don't like talking about policy, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, we don't have to go into the weeds on policy.
What was the point here? I completely
I
lost
think
the
our
fucking
point was I know we got on corruption and funding as an influence.
Let's go for another 15 minutes and then call it.
Sure thing.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess we're talking about media literacy here. I know we are all well versed at this and knowing how there are biases amongst media sources, how we have to keep in mind who they're funded by. But it also doesn't mean, like, I don't know, there's just this conspiracy theory that was kind of debunking the other day. It was like the Joe Rogan one and with Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
About the I guess it was like a Bitcoin pump and dump scheme or something like that.
Yeah.
One thing is I was not able to find any non-conspiracy source of information regarding the so-called pump and dump scheme. But there was one pertinent thing that I was looking at, and it's just like when you're talking about logic and trying to make connections that aren't there. One of the assertions in this conspiracy video, and I'm not talking about conspiracy in general, I'm just talking about basic logic and using your brain to parse out truth. One of the claims was Jamie Vernon's dad was in the military. He worked on a base, and at that base, they specialized in information warfare. The conclusion was, because Jamie Vernon's dad worked on this base, that he is a specialist in information warfare. Now, obviously, people like you and me can spot the fallacy there. Like, we don't know exactly what the fuck he was doing on this base. It doesn't mean that he was a specialist in information warfare because he worked there. It's like telling me that I am a drone pilot because I work in a specific building that houses drone pilots. It just does not. It's just not. It's a logical leap that some people get caught in, and they don't really realize that that's a logical leap. And this is something that happens across all media. It's not. I won't say all media. But some media will present things to you. They won't tell you of that. It's quite a bit of a logical leap. I know the more biased you get in the media source, the more that occurs. But it's something that people just have to be very, very cognizant about, to look at what is being presented and if the logic is actually correct. And if there's any information there that's missing that could lead you to a different conclusion. Like, for all we know, Jamie Vernon's dad could have been the cook on that base, could have been a janitor, could have been an MP, who knows?
Right.
So there's these things we just have to be aware of, that we have to look at what information's missing that could explain something that could be possibly different from the conclusion that they're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we're all aware of this, but if we're just trying to educate people on what they need to look out for, that's something that you got to look out for.
My general rule of thumb is, when something seems even innocuously bullshit, find more than one source for it. And like, if you can find local news sources, that's useful. If you can find like .gov sources, that's useful. If you could find .org sources and then verify the quality of that organization, that's useful. Like weird domain extensions are automatic red flags for me. If it's a .me or a .ru, I don't trust it. If it's RT, I don't trust it outright. If it's Al Jazeera, I don't trust it outright. Like something has to have, like if it's a news story and it doesn't have an AP Newswire tag to it, I think it's not as verifiable. So you have to do a little bit more homework on that information to make sure that it's, verifiable. A lot of that goes into stuff about the Kurds in northern Syria, right? Like there's a lot of stories that have been published by, Vice about the Kurds, and some of it is kind of dubious. But at the same time,
Vice likes the Kurds.
Well, a lot of people like the Kurds. It's not just Vice. There's a lot of people in the U.S. military who like the Kurds. There's a lot of people in the State Department who think that an independent Kurdistan should be recognized by the U.S. government. So, like, it's not such a far-fetched position. But when people are presenting, like, acts on the ground in Kobani, you have to have verifiable information. What makes the Vox information relatively good is that they have people on the scene providing the information. So, like, this gets back into what I was saying before about primary, secondary, and tertiary reporting.
Yeah, it was interesting too.
Reporting, it's usually up to you to make analysis on it.
Yeah, I had a primary report from a Kurdish Uber driver that I had like a 20-minute conversation with.
That's a secondary report because you weren't there.
I wasn't there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Secondary because he was there. Anyway, he was talking about like Kurdish politics is just as much filled with bullshit as here in the U.S. And he says like a lot of information you get coming out about the Kurds is super tainted. Like he told me they don't show you the bad side of Kurdish society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I definitely know that we are not presented everything because the Kurds are very favorable to U.S. global politics.
Well, and the same could be argued about Iranian politics because it's literally like the opposite of how a lot of American media treats Kurdish politics. And the reality is that these are complex societal. Jesus Christ! Can I speak English?
Complex societal systems.
Complex societal systems. They are complex societal systems in which, unless you're there, you can't really take in the full structures of these societies. And even if you are there, you don't have as much information as somebody who lives there. And even if you're somebody who lives there, you don't have as much information as somebody who has tendrils out into the broader society getting more and more information. Like it's an information game. The more information you get, the more rounded out your picture of a certain topic can be. Like you can't just believe one article. You can't just believe one book.
Well, I think it's a variety of different information is important too, because you can have an enormously large quantity of information that just sort of confirms the same information, and it might be like there might be other sides to that story that might be more verifiable.
Well, yeah, I think in the case where we're talking about with the Kurds and Iran is that our information is very, very filtered because these are countries on the other side of the globe, and we really don't pay attention to their local news sources at all.
Yeah.
We don't talk to Iranian people on the ground regularly. So all of our news is being filtered in that respect.
Yeah.
And like I know on Rogan recently had a war correspondent. He had a lot of favorable things to say about talking to regular Iranians and how they are very displeased with their government and things of that nature. So
Well,
it's
you know what the irony of that is that literally in what was it 2014 the Iranian people had an election for a new prime minister, which doesn't happen in other places in the Middle East. That we in the United States government, or I'm not no longer part of that, but that the United States government has supported in the past and continues to support. Like there's a king in Jordan,
Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. There's a king in Saudi Arabia. They don't have elections there, but Iran had an election where they elected a reformer. So, like President Rouhani was a reformer.
Yeah,
it's more democratic than Saudi Arabia, who we support. It's like, come on, like.
Well, it's just this chess game of international politics. It's like, okay, Israel and Iran fucking hate each other, and then we got to support Israel. It's like, it's just like a large geopolitical chess game. It does seem super hypocritical that we would be against an Arabic democracy, but fuck.
Persians aren't Arabs.
A Persian democracy, yeah. But yeah, man, it does seem super hypocritical, and I would say it pretty much is. I don't really understand all the geopolitics that's going on over there in the Middle East, so I'm hesitant to comment on a lot of it.
It's basically a Mexican standoff, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this shit up then.
All right, well, fucking media literacy, do it. Be critical, think critically.
Just run a quick Google search. No shitty websites, and if you can't find a good website, then it's probably not true.
Okay, here's another thing too. There's Media Bias Fact Check, which is kind of like a Metacritic of journalistic entities.
Wikipedia.
Also, Media Bias Fact Check. If a website that is writing articles is not on that fucking site, then you can pretty much dismiss it outright.
Yep.
Yeah, it's likely dubious. But if you do find it on Media Bias Fact Check, then if enough people have analyzed it, because it's a metacritical site, people kind of report what they find, and you'll be able to see what people think about specific websites and where they believe it to be in the realm of factual information or bias.
Yep. Andrew, you got any parting shots?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, media literacy is really important, and it's hard to do, but also really important to do. I personally am going and resolving to be a little bit more careful about that after this too, because I do try, but I don't try hard enough sometimes. So it's important for sure.
I think my parting shot is that I think the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. And like,
the more you do it, the more you can into it.
Yeah, I literally was trained how to tell what is real and what is not real, and to question my own biases as part of like my former job. So like it's not hard, you just have to practice. Just you
just have to
verify your information.
Yeah.
And there's definitely, once you practice and you got that pattern recognition down, it becomes second nature.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of them are really obvious, but some of them are more difficult to discern than others.
and you'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Just practice. All right, Dustin, sign us out.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for checking out our media literacy chat. And I do have a book chat planned. I haven't have a date, but it seems that we will be talking about American Gods by Neil Gaiman. That's what it looks like as of now. But if you're listening, go and check out the poll and vote. That could change depending on what you want to read. So let us know. And thank you for being a Mixed Mill artist. Thank you all Patreons for your support. And have a great evening.
Adios. Everyone.